Metrobank champion women in cricket and in business. During the England-New Zealand series this summer, they gave 3 of their female entrepreneur customers the chance to put their brand centre stage at their local cricket ground. Head to Metrobank's social channels to watch Sophie, Jo, Jem and Jennifer's story and be inspired to think what you could be capable of. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. A slightly different show for you today. We're ramping up our T20 World Cup preview coverage. We're going to try and work out what to expect from the pitches in the UAE and which players may or may not come into the mix. We've got some more Ireland-England chat. And instead of Lauren, we have Alice Capsey joining us on the show for the second time this year to hear about how England are shaping up out in the UAE. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Katya, Witney and Cam Ponsonby, who's going to be a more regular voice on the show over the next few weeks. He's one of a handful of journos who's heading out to the World Cup. I've also discovered this week I'm really bad at saying UAE. I think there are no hard sounds to sort of hold on to. So I'm going to try and avoid saying that as much as possible. Before we get into what to expect from a World Cup in that place, Katya, the Ireland-England T20Is were very good fun. Lauren spoke about them on last week's show. But I guess a question for you. Who do you think has advanced their case more who previously might not have been in England's first choice plans?
I think it's a tricky one because when you look at the series, there have been like pockets of individual performances that were really, really good, but I don't think anyone's kind of grabbed it by the horns and absolutely kind of taken that chance with all the senior players being away. I think if you look at the bowling department, Izzy Wong had one good game and one not so good game, so there's been quite a lot of that. I think you can say that Bryony Smith has done a really good job, particularly with the bat, but as well with the ball. So potentially her, but then it's also to say, like, you know, with the spinners, it's hard to then advance into that first team with the 4 spinners that England have got going to the UAE. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I think obviously Tammy Beaumont's been kind of the standout with the bat, and we already know how good Tammy Beaumont is, and it's in some ways a surprise that she wasn't in the T20 World Cup squad anyway. So I'm not entirely sure what England have learned from this series, and I think it's quite hard to look at that squad, what the pecking order is now beneath the first choice team. It seems like there's a layer of people kind of performing at quite a similar level without really shining and standing out from that group to kind of demand that next step of selection.
Is it the worst thing to almost have it confirmed that the first choice group you have is the first choice group? If that makes sense. As Katya says, no one's really given them a massive selection headache.
No, of course, and you have that stability. It can be two sides of the same coin. Stability can also be seen as a critic would say, like a closed shop, as it were. So when England finished their series against New Zealand, it was before the 100 started. And it was odd in that we kind of already knew what the World Cup squad was going to be. There was a bit of potential for change with the change from Bangladesh to the UAE. But then we asked John Lewis and Heather Knight, kind of, is that the same squad you'd have taken to Bangladesh? And they kind of slightly hopped around it all like, yes. So I think people have known for a long time that if they're in the squad, they're in the squad. And this was an opportunity for people to kind of show, just to remind them that they're knocking on the door. I think I've covered a number of Southeast Stars games, and I was kind of pleased to see that Bryony Smith was kind of proving her worth on the international stage again, because she can be such a powerful player and can bat. She can basically, during the power play, she can take down the power play. And it's such a valuable trait in all forms of cricket. I also feel a bit sorry for Maddie Villiers in that she's potentially 2 balls away from her stock really rising. That final over in the ODI, which the ball skipped away on the final ball for a boundary, had that been stopped, then all of a sudden she saved a game and won a game in the final over, and then the same thing happened in one of the T20s. But again, she's trying to kick out one of Charlie Dean, Sophie Eccleston or Sarah Glenn, which I don't think anyone's going to do ever, unless your name is Lindsay Smith and you're playing 4 spinners.
Yeah.
I think the one that might potentially be disappointed with not staking a claim to that place is Holly Armitage, because Holly Armitage was very much on England's radar at the start of this year. She went out to New Zealand. She was clearly near the top of that pecking order with the bat when over the winter and for England's series against New Zealand in the summer. And she had 1 good innings in the ODI in Belfast, but apart from that, she didn't do much. She had that horrible incident in the last ODI where she misfielded off the final ball, which essentially lost England the game. And I think she potentially would have been hoping for better and really establishing herself as that kind of spare batter outside that group for that series.
Yeah, I think what's quite interesting on Smith and I guess all the batters is that there's a real logjam of players up top, right? If you just riff names of England players who are outside the first choice 11 who are good batters. They're basically all top order players. And, we've talked about Bess Heath being in the mix. She's in that squad for the World Cup despite not having the best numbers in recent years. The reason, and Lauren mentioned this a few weeks ago, the reason for that is because there are just so few middle order options. With 8 teams, 8 regional teams, the best players tend to play at the top of the order. So it's quite hard identifying who are the next players who are going to bat 5 or 6. And I don't think England have probably learnt that from this series. I think I'm a massive fan of Paige Schofield, and there's a bit of a missed opportunity. She went okay, but I think she's someone who really does have the game to thrive at international cricket, and she had a lot of starts without quite pushing on.
I really agree with that. You've tapped into a confirmation bias there. Paige Schofield was one of these cricketers. It's hit her and Daniel Bell-Drummond. I've only ever seen them score runs when I've watched them play. And so as far as I'm concerned, Paige Schofield's just, whenever I've seen them, I'm just like, you're just an adult. You're such a wise head. And she always just scores like difficult runs. And so I'm delighted. I wanted to mention her, but I was like, is she a good player, or have you just seen her play well, basically? So to get a second voice, I'm happy with that.
I think Paige Schofield is a firm pod favourite on this one.
Yeah, excellent.
There are definitely, and I won't name them, there are definitely players who fall in the opposite category, players who I've never ever seen do well. That's for another show. Elsewhere, Australia beat New Zealand in a T20I this morning. Phoebe Litchfield hit 64 off 43 to get Australia over the line. New Zealand have now lost 8 games in a row for the first time ever. A hat tip to the ever reliable Hypocaust on Twitter. Couple of concussion bits to get into. So first of all, there was no Ash Gardner for Australia. She collided with Georgia Wareham in training. This video has been shared quite a lot, which I'm surprised by, given that it's quite a nasty blow and one that forced Gardner out of the game. But Australia is saying it's a precaution because Gardner's had quite a few concussions previously. Katya, we were trying to look before the podcast to sort of confirm this, because this is the line that we've been given. You found a line from Gardner that said that she actually has had several concussions over the years. Yeah,
well, when the 11 was named, Gardner obviously wasn't in it, but Georgia Wareham was, which kind of, when I looked at the incident, it looked to me like Wareham had come off 100%. The worst for wear on it, especially when you looked at how quickly her neck had kind of jammed back, and that's quite a thing with concussion. I think the whiplash effect of it, where I'm not a doctor, but I think it's where your brain kind of reverberates in your skull, that's the difficult issue with it. And I was looking at it and I was thinking, why has Gardner been kept out rather than Wareham? And people were talking about that Gardner has a history of concussion. She's had at least 7 concussions in her professional career. And that was the last concussion I could find in 2020. So that's still 4 years ago. So there may well could have been some that I couldn't remember or can't find in between. And she said in a previous interview that she suffers particularly from delayed onset concussion. So feeling fine on that day, and then either the day later or in the hours later, she says, rather than feeling woozy as soon as I get hit, it's more so the day after that I get really bad headaches and feel nauseous. So I guess that's another reason why they would have kept her out of the 11 rather than risk another head injury. Because like you said before we were recording, it's not the first head injury that gets you, it's the second hit in quick succession that then gets you. So it seemed like it was more of a precaution keeping her out than anything else. She did look, after initially looking quite shocked on that video by the impact, she did look okay, and she was walking about, and she was on the sidelines in a tracksuit for the match. So she seems, cross fingers, okay.
Well, that's good. Quite often we say that there's not enough precautions taken. Speaking of, there was another incident in the game itself that, again, there's a video online so you can see it yourself. It's quite humorous. Do you want to describe what the video is and then get to the serious point?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can describe what this video is. So in the last over of New Zealand's innings, Healy's obviously keeping, and I think it's Lee Kasparik who goes for a reverse ramp shot, and I couldn't see footage of the actual ball, so I don't. But from what I can make out, Healy was hitting the head off an edge from Kasparik's bat. I don't know whether it was a graze or whether it was a flush hit, but it seems like she was hitting the head. And
her helmet, and it's mandatory now in international cricket that if ball touches helmet, there is a check.
Yeah, and an immediate helmet change as well. And the Australia physio runs onto the pitch, and Alyssa Healy kind of runs out to meet her holding her helmet. And as soon as she gets to the physio, she stops, immediately changes direction and runs off again.
So she literally runs away from the physio.
Yeah, and then the physio gives chase, gives
Amazing.
chase.
Well,
all the
not
way-
amazing, but yeah.
All the way back into the middle, into the stumps, before finally catching up with Healy, and again immediately turning around. The physio this time running off the pitch after one word, and it kind of looks like, we don't completely know, but it does kind of look like Healy has refused a concussion check, which I wasn't aware that players had the power to do, because obviously in that kind of cauldron of pressure in international cricket, you're not always making the best decisions for your health. If you want to get back onto the pitch and you want to complete it, if the time's ticking, and whatever, you are not making the best decisions for your health, and the physios are there to stop that and to make sure that you go and have that concussion check. And I'm not sure it's a great look to be refusing that, especially when you've had that incident before the match. And you did say that they've shown they're taking concussion protocol seriously by not letting Ash Gardner play in that match. But you could also say they've not let Gardner play because she's got this massive history of concussions. They did let Georgia Wareham play. So perhaps taking it more seriously would have not been allowing Georgia Wareham to play as well.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. I think on the Healy one, I feel hesitant to comment without seeing the actual ball. It could have been like a graze on the grill. I don't know.
My thought process is, and I haven't seen the ball either, so I'm gonna hypothesize. If I'm a doctor and I'm trying to check someone's sane of mind, and they run away from me, I reckon that's clue number one. Get her off the pitch.
Yeah. It honestly, search it out on Twitter. It's a remarkable video because the physio is so confused. So confused.
Yeah.
She's like, the player is literally running
She's
away
running
from
after
me.
an adult.
She's running, and then she's chasing her. You know, if you think this this sounds ridiculous, we are describing this accurately. It is a totally weird couple of seconds. Literally, the physio is chasing Alyssa Healy to try and perform the concussion test.
I do I get the not wanting to comment when you haven't seen the ball, but I do feel like if that is very fair, but if that ball has in any way hit Healy's helmet, the reason that rule is in place that as soon as the helmet is hit, even if it's a graze, is so that physios and players aren't then making the decision on the severity of the hit just by looking at it. So by putting that blanket kind of thing in of wherever the ball hits, however hard, if it's a graze, whatever, then you check it. That's why it's there. So I don't really think players should have the opportunity to refuse concussion replacements, even if it was just a graze. Yeah,
so I've seen the footage of Healy running away. I haven't seen the delivery. But in my head, I'm like, well, we should probably do the check and whatever. Yeah,
maybe that's normal behaviour for Alyssa Healy. Maybe that's why.
Exactly. Maybe
that
maybe that is the way of her passing the concussion test. Maybe she knows that is what the test is. She has to remember that she has to run away from the physio. Anyway, moving on. The small business of this World Cup in Asia. For context, and I know regular listeners will be all over this, the location changed from Bangladesh to the UAE only a few weeks ago, given the current political climate in Bangladesh. It means we have a World Cup that's going to be held at only two venues, Sharjah and Dubai. I'm very happy to criticise the ICC when they deserve it, and I think it's fair. But I think in this instance, I do understand that it must have been very hard for them to literally organise a World Cup in a few weeks, given the lack of warning time they had. There is also the consideration that actually very little high-end women's cricket has been held in the UAE, so players have almost nothing to go on from their own experiences. People have said that it could be a bit win the toss, win the game, based off what's happened in men's cricket over there. Cam, is that a good idea to formulate views on how conditions will be based on what's happened in men's cricket for women's cricket?
Well, according to England, no, it's not a good idea. And England invited a number of journalists up to Loughborough, I think a week or so ago, basically to walk them through their strategizing and their planning for the World Cup ahead. And one of the anecdotes, I'm paraphrasing a piece by Nick Friend from The Cricketer here. And one of the anecdotes that was used was Gareth Breeze, who's the Welsh Fire women's coach in the 100. The men's team would often ask him, how's the pitch playing for the match at Sphere Gardens? And he'd go, lots of bounce in this wicket. And then the men would come and play and skid on. And he would play in completely different fashion. They'd go, Breezy, what's going on here? And he's like, I told you what happened. And so there's a big thing which John Lewis keeps on talking about, in that there's relatively little you can gain from previous men's historical data that you can necessarily apply to the women's game. And one of the things they mention often is that women's seamers in particular get the ball to bounce a lot more than men do. It's something to do with spin and science, and I'm not a physicist, but that's just what they're talking about. And so
I thought you were. That's why we got you on.
I know, sorry, I deeply apologise. And so they're kind of going into this World Cup blind to a certain extent, because there's only so much limited historical data that they can apply to surfaces. Now, that's not means that they're kind of throwing the book out the window and not trying to learn anything. I think they think Sharjah is going to be particularly low. I think we're expecting Lindsay Smith, if she is going to be more likely to play in Sharjah than in Dubai, where it's a bit more of a bouncy surface. But they've effectively, there's a bloke called Liam Sanders, and he's basically this like scientist guy. And England brought him in a year ago and was like, we're going to study how to win this World Cup in Bangladesh.
Oh, poor guy.
A month out, it was like, what we said to you for you to do in a year, can you do us in a month and change it to the UAE?
Yeah.
And so they basically done as much research as possible in the UAE for a month's period of time. And yeah, so they've done their research, they've done their homework, they feel pretty confident in this 3, potentially even 4 spinners method. But I wouldn't say it's a case of looking back to the men's 2021 World Cup and saying win toss, win match, Dew's going to be a massive factor. We just don't know for sure.
It's interesting looking at England's schedule. 3 out of their 4 group games are at Sharjah. And if they win their group, which I think they are probably favourites to do so, they will have their semi-final also at Sharjah. The final and the other semi-final are in Dubai. One thing that we can look backwards for in women's cricket is previous tournaments which also had very few venues. Katya, you've had a look at previous tournaments. Is there any patterns that we can find?
Yeah, there kind of is. I think it's quite tricky. I mean, we've said we can't look at men's cricket in the UAE and then extrapolate to the women's tournament. I also think it's quite hard to look at previous women's cricket and in different
parts of the world,
especially when you consider how much higher T20 scores are now than they were even 4 or 5 years ago. So kind of the exception to the rule is the last T20 World Cup in South Africa last year. South Africa is obviously a great place for scoring runs anyway, but that was one that was held across 3 grounds. And there was very little kind of difference in the run rates in the pitches across the tournament and into the knockout stages.
So the theory basically being that if you have loads of cricket at one venue, eventually the pitches get tired and slower.
Yeah.
And that's not what happened in 2023, really.
No. So across 2023, that was one of the ones where only 3 venues were used. And although there was a lot of cricket played on these pitches, still up in the knockout stages, run rates around 7 or 8, pretty high scoring games. It was a good tournament for runs. And that's kind of the exception almost to the rule. So if you look back at 2018, which was another one where only 3 venues were used, that was in the Caribbean. But if you look at the deterioration in run scoring there, and 2018 I think is actually the furthest back we can go really to compare, because the difference between how high teams were scoring before that and how high they're scoring now is just impossible to compare. But if you look at 2018, there was a dramatic difference as the tournament went on in run rates and how many runs were scored on the pitch. It was a pretty low scoring tournament anyway. But when you look at the knockouts, they were all held in one venue in Antigua. And India and England. India batted first in the semi-final against England and were bowled out very cheaply. And then England batted first in the final against Australia and were again bowled out cheaply. And it's not like England in the semi-final and Australia in the final went and chased down the runs really hard, but it was quite noticeable that it was much harder to score runs on those pitches as the tournament went on. And then if you compare that as well to the tournament in Australia, that would have been 2020. Am I right? That was 2020.
Before COVID.
That was held across 6 or 7, I think it was 6 different venues, and there was very little difference in the amount of runs scored on those wickets across the tournament. So that theory does, on the loose kind of history we've got to base it in the women's game, it does kind of hold that if the conditions are ideal for run scoring, obviously the pitches will hold up. And if you spread it across multiple venues, then the pitches will hold up. I get you said it's not right to criticise the ICC for having to arrange a tournament in a very short space of time, and I do agree with you. What I will say is I think it is pretty extreme to hold a World Cup across 2 venues, and I think I'm right in saying that would have been the case for Bangladesh if we'd been in Bangladesh anyway. So I'm not sure that planning to hold a World Cup across 2 venues is the right thing to be doing based on the history that we've got and the data that we have available to us, even if it is limited.
I think it'll be fine. Because I think at Sharjah, and so I tried to look up a number of pitches that each ground has compared to 2018 when they did this as well. Because in 2018 it was in Guyana and St Lucia, and then the semi-final, 2 semis, and the final was at Antigua. And so Sharjah has 4 wickets that you can use. Dubai, I couldn't find the information, but it's a bigger ground, it's a bigger square, so it'd be 4 or 6 or whatever. So if you've got 23 matches in the competition, 12 at Dubai, 11 at Sharjah, spread equally over all 4 wickets, you're at 3 matches wicket.
Maybe it becomes a Sharjah problem because you're right. Dubai is actually a really big ground, so if they've got a big square, you can have lots of different pitches. Problem with Sharjah, it's a really small ground as well. So if it's in terms of,
but the wickets are the same size. If they have three matches on 1 wicket, 3 on the second, 3 on the third, and then 3 on the fourth. I guess that's literally a finals day.
You have less wiggle room, I suppose, on a smaller ground, in terms of how far you can go one side or the other.
No, that's when. So Sharjah has 4 playing wickets. There's 6 wickets in the thing. They have 2 practice either side and 4 in the middle. So I think I'm not saying the pitches. I think there's a chance that the pitches will be slow and low and not particularly fun. But I don't know if that will be a symptom of just being across 2 venues.
Interesting. Well, England are out there already and actually have been out there for a week already. So they're going to be seriously acclimatised to conditions by the time the tournament starts, which is still 2 or so weeks away. Alice Capsey is obviously there. Just turned 20 last month, and already gearing up for her second T20 World Cup. Here is the young England star on how prep for the World Cup is going and dealing with the haters. Alice Capsey joins us from the UAE. England's World Cup campaign starts in just under a couple of weeks' time. Alice, great to have you with us. How's it been out in the UAE at the moment? I imagine that the climate is probably quite different to what we had in the UK this summer.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a big reality change for climate, that's for sure. It's been high 30s, especially training in the afternoon when it's peak sun. So luckily we've managed to get a few evening training sessions in. So the temperature's been a bit more bearable. But no, it's been great fun. An amazing country to be in and explore. So really enjoying it so far.
It's quite a long build up to the World Cup, sort of acclimatising to conditions. What does the prep look like at the moment? Is it just lots of nets, training sessions after training session, or do you have warm-up games on the horizon as well?
A bit of both, to be honest. We've obviously had this kind of UAE camp in the diary for a while now. So for it, the World Cup to now change to the UAE is amazing. Obviously, we get 10 days to kind of learn the conditions a little bit better, start preparing for how we want to go about the World Cup. But yeah, like you said, we've also got a couple of warm-up games, I think, against Australia and New Zealand. So that will again be really good, just to match ourselves against 2 high-quality oppositions. Obviously, Australia being the leading T20 side at the moment in the world, which will be a great challenge leading into the World Cup.
What was the last couple of months like with the, I guess, uncertainty over where the World Cup would be? You know, Bangladesh was in the news quite a lot. There weren't many noises from the ICC about what would happen to the location. Then sort of very suddenly the location for the World Cup changed. What was that like from a player's perspective?
Yeah, look, obviously there was a bit of umming and ahhing around where we were going to be. We obviously wish Bangladesh the best and hope for their safety there and all of that. But we had a little bit of communication from Jonathan Finch, our director of cricket, around kind of every couple of weeks we had a different message just saying where the lay of the land was. He couldn't necessarily give us too much information, but I think we all knew deep down that the issues that are going on in Bangladesh are probably bigger than having a World Cup there currently. And we wish them all the best. But I think from a cricketing point of view, I think regardless of where we were going to be in the world, we're all just really excited to be playing in this World Cup against some of the best teams in the world.
One of the interesting bits of this World Cup coming up is that there's been very little high-profile women's cricket played in the UAE. So you've been there for a week or so. What would you say is unique about conditions there? You know, a lot of people talk about having a big factor in night games in particular.
Yeah, this is my first time being in the UAE, so it's been amazing to experience it, to train here. Obviously, I know that a number of different English counties normally come out here for a training camp throughout the winter. So, yeah, it's been awesome to kind of be out here, see what the pitches are like. We didn't really know what to expect too much. Obviously, we've got our coaches are from the men's game who have toured out here, but men's and women's cricket is very different. So, yeah, I think throughout the last couple of days, it's been about learning about conditions, what we think will work, what are good options for us as batters and for the bowlers as well. And yeah, it's no different to touring to any other country. Every country has their own uniqueness around pitches, and it's just about learning that and trying to use that in favour of how we go about things as a team.
So is that part and parcel of touring anywhere, really, where you use the first week or so acclimatising to location, and as a batter, do you change your game ever so slightly for the different conditions?
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously when you tour the likes of Australia, you know the pitches are a bit harder. It's going to bounce a bit more, so that kind of changes how you bat. It changes what shots are probably better options to different bowlers and balls. And then when you go to India, obviously it stays a little bit lower, a little bit more spin, and that then changes your options again. So I think as a batter, it's about creating a repertoire of options, and then you can pick and choose which ones are the best for those conditions. And that's kind of half the skill of touring, I think, is learning quickly, adapting, and then sticking to the strengths that you have and not trying to change too much because you still want to use your best options.
It's also, the last T20 World Cup was only last year, so it's not actually very long between World Cups. Obviously, the World Cup being in a completely different location as well changes things quite a lot. How do you think England are set compared to where you were in 2023?
Yeah, I think we've had an awesome 18 months of prep. Obviously, John Lewis came in just before our T20 World Cup last year and started implementing a few things, but that was at the very beginning of our journey. We're now 18 months down the line, and we're really, I think, in a good place with where we are as a team and how we want to play our cricket. We know that kind of if we focus on ourselves, and kind of block out the outside noise, we generally get the best out of each other. We've done a lot of work on kind of connecting and helping each other to get the best out of each other. But a World Cup's always exciting. This is now my second World Cup, which sounds pretty awesome to say. And we're just really looking forward to the challenge. Obviously, World Cup, you've got the biggest stage, I guess, to inspire and entertain and get women's cricket at the forefront. And I think that platform we're really looking forward to trying to use and like I said, inspire and entertain people around us. And it's just about growing the game, and we're really looking forward to coming across the best teams in the world.
You mentioned that this is your second World Cup. You've only just turned 20. How do you feel about your own game at the moment compared to, say, a year and a half ago?
Yeah, I'm a lot more settled. I feel in a great place at the moment, so I'm really excited for this World Cup. Last year, obviously, I was coming off a major injury with my collarbone, and that did affect me in a lot of ways. My prep wasn't ideal, and I just felt a bit undercooked going into it. So, especially being my first World Cup, there was a lot of anxiety around that. And whereas, kind of 18 months on, obviously, I struggled in 2023, just around kind of I guess, the eyes on, and probably not having it as good a year as I had in 2021 and 2022. Even though I'd probably scored the same amount of runs, it just didn't feel as fluent, and so I struggled with that. But coming into 2024, I just seem to be really relaxed, really calm. I feel in a really great place with my batting, which is amazing. And yeah, like I said, going into this World Cup, I'm really excited. And I'm just looking forward to the opportunity to, like I said, playing against the best teams in the world, but especially with this group, just the freedom that they allow you to go out and play with. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
How do you reflect on the scrutiny that you had on you in the last couple of years? Because you had quite a unique ascension really into professional cricket, in that you were so young, but also your rise coincided with the rise of the 100. So it was quite conveniently placed almost in that your career was going in one direction, but so was the tournament. So you came very closely aligned with that tournament, and I guess interest in women's cricket as a whole was rising at the same time as well. And you were, literally just a child in amongst that. How was that for you looking back on it?
Yeah, looking back, I see it as a positive, and I see it as a positive, and also I see the challenges, obviously, through the experience. I've been incredibly fortunate that I've seemed to time my career so far pretty perfectly, with opportunities arising. Obviously, first year of the 100 getting called off due to COVID, and then I was just in the right age, just about to play in that first edition of the 100. And then obviously, as it's gone forward, regional cricket, getting my first professional contract, and then just seeing the women's game grow over the last, say, 4 years. I feel very fortunate with the opportunities that I've had, and I guess the timing and I think belief that my coaches have had in me. But then also it has been a challenge. I would say that 21 and 2022 were amazing. I was absolutely loving cricket, everything about it, and it's always great when people are saying nice things about you. But 2023, I did really struggle. I had a little bit of criticism around kind of my batting and my form and things like that, and whether I was kind of getting that third year like syndrome where players get worked out, and I really struggled with that. And actually, kind of then with my injuries as well, that weighed quite a burden on me. But coming into this year, I've learned so much about my game. I've had so many amazing conversations with players, coaches, support staff around kind of my mindset towards my game. And I'm now in such a good place where I feel like whether I'm scoring runs or not, I can stay pretty level. I don't listen to the noise. I don't look at it anymore, which is a great place to be in, I personally think, as an athlete. And yeah, I'm really enjoying my cricket now. But when I did have that attention and that noise, I then found it quite difficult. And I think that's part and parcel of learning / coming into a professional environment. But it was a shock to the system, that is for sure. And I think necessarily it wasn't even my form. It was just kind of the way I was going about things was different to 2021 and 2022. And when people are writing about you but aren't in the environment that you're in, and they're not in the conversations that you're in, I just found it really difficult. That I was like getting frustrated. I was like, they don't know what I'm being told, and they don't know what my role is. And it felt a bit unfair. But I'm now I'm really at peace with it. I'm okay with criticism purely because I focus on what my peers around me, what my family thinks, my friends, my coaches, and it's their opinions that matter to me. I really like the saying, and someone told me this last year, is that if someone is speaking about you, if they can't say it to your face, if they don't have your number, then their opinion isn't worth it. And I really like that. It's like the people who matter to you, the people who contact you, you speak to that day to day, they're the opinions that you want to worry about. And if they can't contact you, you don't have their number, then it's not worth it. And that really stuck with me. And I'm just really in a great place now with my cricket, and finding that on-off balance of kind of life and cricket has been amazing.
Well, it sounds like you're in a really good place at the moment, which is great to hear. Best of luck at the World Cup, and thanks so much for speaking to us.
No, thanks for having me.
Earlier this summer, Metrobank rewarded 3 of their female business customers with mini sponsorship packages at their local cricket grounds in Bristol, Southampton and Hove during England versus New Zealand. Check out how it unfolded on Metrobank's social channels.